Hi, my name is Javier Albornoz, and today we're going to be talking about the Pro Tools I/O setup. So let's take a look at what the I/O setup and some of the options for your audio playback hardware are in Pro Tools. So the drop-down tab where you would access those kinds of options are here in Setup. So as you can see, the first one at the top is Hardware. Now, when we open up Hardware, you're going to see a list of the audio interfaces that you have chosen working with Pro Tools at the moment. Right now, it is the Fireface 800. And if I choose to launch the Setup app, what that's going to actually open up is the Setup app for your operating system, whether that's Windows or Mac OS. And the other place where you would change these kinds of things are really dependent on what type of audio hardware you're using. So for example, I can open up here, and for this specific Fireface 800, it does have its own application, actually two applications where you are going to have setup options related to the routing of the audio interface. So when we go to the playback engine option under setup, that's where we're actually going to choose what audio interface or sound card in your computer is being used. Now here I can see that I have various options, and really the built-in output, say if you were using a laptop without an audio interface, would be pretty much your default sound card for Pro Tools or any other audio application that you're using. But right now I am using the Fireface 800 audio interface, so that's the one selected. These settings here, hardware buffer size, so this is going to determine your audio latency when audio does play back out of Pro Tools. So for example, we are looking at this in samples. So these are very, very small numbers. If you think that we are at a 48 kilohertz sample rate or 48,000 hertz, so 256 samples is a very, very small number out of that 48,000 samples per second. So it's really not a lot of delay, but when you are working with, for example, entering MIDI data and playing into a MIDI controller to trigger a virtual instrument, this can really have an impact on the latency. Now, at the same time, if we do set this to the lowest option, it may impact the playback of your Pro Tools session, and your audio might cut out, or the application may stop playback, and you can have a lot of different problems. So it really is about finding the balance depending on whether you're working with only audio or a combination of MIDI and audio. It's really dependent on your system as well, and what kind of audio interface you're using, and what your CPU is like in your machine. So let's leave this window here and go to our actual I/O setup window. Now, your I/O setup is going to be something that, for example, in the studio where you walk in and there's already a Pro Tools setup, you might not really have to or want to change anything here. But for troubleshooting purposes, it is good to know what you're looking at here. So most of the time when you do open and create a new project in Pro Tools, you do have the option to just use the previous I/O settings from your previous Pro Tools session. So it does carry over most of the time, so your I/O setup doesn't change, and that's great and often desirable. But let's take a look at some of these tabs in case you do want to actually make changes to your I/O setup. So here we have listed all the inputs and outputs that are part of the interface that I'm using at the moment. So you can see here that there are several analog, actually we've got 10 analog inputs. We have a SPDIF digital input left and right, so 2 channels. And then we have 16 channels of ADAT optical audio inputs. So here along this part of your I/O window, you can actually set up which ones are activated. And right now we do have all of them as stereo channels. And this audio interface happens to have 28 total selectable inputs here. Now you see the same kind of thing with your output selection. You've got your 10 analog and 9 and 10 being your headphones, the SPDIF digital, and also optical output 16 channels as well. So what's important here is this little speaker icon that you have under rather next to our ADAT 1 and 2 audio output on the interface, and that's showing you the monitor path. So here is going to be where we're going to hear material coming out of Pro Tools. It's going to be that ADAT optical 1 and 2. Now, if I were using my analog 1 and 2 as my main stereo output where I'm going to set up my master track to go to that output, well, I would just choose monitor path and I would choose analog 1 and 2 here. Now, another important thing to consider is your audition path. So what this is in your clips menu on the right here, you can actually audition audio files that might be in your session but haven't been yet placed into your edit window. So for example, if you have several takes of dialogue or various sound effects files loaded into your clips menu or your audio pool, you can actually go through and audition them before you decide whether to bring them into your edit window. Now let's keep moving along to our bus tab. Now what you have here, it's going to be where you're going to set up your different buses that get routed to whatever purpose you might need. So for example, if we were working in a 5.1 surround setup, here is where we would actually choose those channels and where they are mapped to. So you've got your left, your center, right, your rear left, your rear right, and your LFE sub effects channel. So right now, this is not a surround setup where I'm at, so we are just using the stereo output to that ADAT 1 and 2, where you do see, again, that speaker icon showing you that that's the monitor path that we're working with. Now, if I did have the surround setup and surround speakers here, I could check these. As you see, then the mapping to output option appears, and this is where I would actually choose what physical output on my audio interface they are going to, and then where you can physically connect them to the appropriate speaker. So the other thing to look at here is also your different buses that you're going to use when working with aux input channels. So we'll take a look at in another tutorial how to work with creating aux input tracks and buses that you might need when you're working with groups or your mix bus and that kind of thing. But for right now, we'll just see how would I activate these. So right now, they are activated. As you can see here, all of our buses are activated, but they're just not going to a physical output on my audio interface, which again, you would check here and select. But they are available to me if I were to create an aux input and I wanted to route a channel to that aux input.